Pardon me while I have a strange interlude.
There is nothing else. Life is an obscure hobo bumming a ride on the omnibus of art.
Along the misty corridors of time, and in those corridors I see figures, strange figures.
Welcome back, my friends, to the AP Strange Show, and this is a very special show indeed. It is kind of more of a video thing. You can listen to it on the podcast feed if you want, but we got some pictures for you if you want to check out the YouTube, and I would generally recommend checking out the YouTube anyway, because every podcast ends up there. And I would greatly appreciate it if people just, even if you don't want to watch them, just go through and hit that like button on all of them. Just because I want to drive those numbers up. Yes, this is me being greedy. Smash that like and subscribe button because I need more followers on there. So I don't know what that hand motion is. Oh, that was the smash.
You were smashing the button.
Okay. Anyway, this kind of, if you're watching the video, it's going to blow up the spot for our guest because you can see her, but I will be in trouble if I don't get my sponsor out of the way, and I don't want to lose my funding. So today's show is brought to you by Robertson's Gently Used Hot Dogs. If you can find a better deal on used hot dogs than Robertson's has to offer, I'd like to hear about it, because they just offer the cheapest and best quality used hot dogs you find out there anywhere. So gently used, just gently. What were they used for? You probably don't want to know. So and I'm killing my guest today. I've been saving that sponsor just for you. My guest.
No.
My guest today is a great friend of mine. We've been friends for a long, long time, and she is like the queen of synchronicities, the Julia Child of sex magic. All kinds of epithets and titles can be applied to her, but I just know her as the one and only, wonderful, inimitable Stephanie Quick. How are you doing, Stephanie?
Hi, I'm doing well. I'm excited about doing this show with you because I feel like, well, like we were talking just prior to this, I was born in Fresno, California in 1962, and then 1967, 68, we moved up to the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. And of course, this was a very tumultuous time. We lived in a suburb. But there was just like an immense amount of politics going on, education, a lot of access to the arts, weird people, and identity and disability rights activism. And I feel like a lot of people get interested in weird stuff that kind of grew out of that time. And they kinda like, I'll hear people say, "Oh, I love the 1990s because, you could have conspiracy theories, but they weren't political." But the conspiracy theories that had come up had grown out of this whole milieu that was very, politically informed, very informed by avant-garde art movements and, radical academia. And so I wanted to talk about that a little because I didn't make a study of it. I just grew up in that environment and got exposed to a lot of these ideas just by being like a kid in this time and place. And
Right. I mean, I think a lot of what you hear is back when conspiracy theories were fun, and
yeah.
right. So
And they
that's
always had
not always necessarily the case. Like,
they always had that kind of underground or that kind of tendency that you really had to be well, like I listened to Mae Brussel a lot on the radio, uh, like in the 80s and stuff through KFJC, which was a junior college radio station. And she was always very explicit about her politics when she was engaging with political material. Um, she was like, pro-democracy and exposing power structures and stuff. And uh, for example, like the excuse me, political assassinations of, starting with JFK, Martin Luther King Jr. Later on, you had people like, I think Fred Hampton of the Black Panthers was assassinated. Um,
Mhm. RFK.
yeah, and looking at that from an explicitly political angle instead of just like, oh, let's try and figure out what happened. Um, I've actually made a, video about her, but it was more about, like, actionable intelligence. How can we deconstruct what we're finding out about the state and its, subterranean structures, what Peter Dale Scott calls the deep state, so that we can, use this action to fight against these, anti-democratic, anti-representational, oppressive, forms of, state action, right?
Mhm.
So it's not just like, "Oh, let's try and figure out what's really going on," or let's have, like, a fun story about, uh, reptilian Deros or whatever. It's like, "Okay,
Yeah.
let's look at this because we're opposed to certain types of state action, and how can we fight that?" So, it's different than just, like, kind of the idea of, like well, like, the idea that came about in the, mid-20th century of, like, neutral objective journalism,
Mhm.
right?
Right.
Um, that explicitly, favors, certain types of speech, right?
Mhm.
So if something is written down and been distributed, then it has, like, more authority and you can track it. But, actually, we were talking about, Mary Ellen Pleasant with Vase for their Christmas special, Vase podcast. And one of the
Yep.
things that we brought up is that you have people who are working against slavery, the abolitionists in the 19th century, John Brown, Mary Ellen Pleasant. And, if you are working against the existing state, and you're basically committing crimes against that state in furtherance of your beliefs, then you may not want to leave like a written records so that you
Yeah.
can be prosecuted and taken out of action. Because part of the thing is that, I mean, John Brown decided to martyr himself, but if everyone's getting martyred, then you don't have anyone left to fight, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So, but a lot of this type of thinking and organizing and activity comes back to like the 60s and 70s, the hippies in the United States organizing for civil rights was earlier, but then also against the Vietnam War, which ended in 1975. I forget, it started like mid 60s, then 1975 it finally ended. But there was a lot of political organizing against the Vietnam War um, that dealt with a lot of these ideas uh,
Mhm.
of, I'm going to say, you're looking at history, you're looking at analysis, and you want to, of course, deal with reality and things that actually went on, but it's a way to inform yourself so that you can, act effectively against these oppressive structures of the
Yeah.
state.
Right.
Everyone is gonna hate things right now because they were expecting, like, a bunch of weird stuff. But, if you
Well,
look
it's very relevant to like where we are now, like you know.
and it well, let me, do something, a little bit kinda, delimit where we are in time and space. For people that don't know, let me see if I can find this here. Here is my
Okay.
mom's, atlas, and you can see this is, like, the San Francisco Bay Area, so over here is the Pacific Ocean.
Mhm.
Um, over here, I think is, Castro Valley, where we grew up. It was a suburb, of San Francisco, which is here. Marin is here, like, George Lucas, Industrial Light and Magic's over here. Berkeley is here, which is, the university, a lot of political activism, that happened. Uh, then if you come down here, here is, let me see, is, Santa Cruz.
Yep.
and it goes down here to Monterey, and then further down there, that below here is like Big Sur, Esalen, all that. Here at this part of the bay is where you're going to have like Silicon Valley, San Jose. Where is and then kind of over in this area is like Palo Alto and Stanford.
Hmm.
Um, and so you have this confluence of all these areas where you have like these big universities. You have a lot of political activism going on, like a ton of art, um, and like people talking about like Burning Man, which was, very experimental. It's become highly influential in culture, right, as a countercultural thing. But it is grounded in these ideas of different ways of organizing human communities, right?
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of that goes back to the 60s and communes, like hippie communes that everyone thinks, oh, isn't that fun? Mutual aid societies. I grew up in Castro Valley, which was it's like a suburb. It had some very nice areas. It had people that came, like Rachel Maddow grew up there, and she's very much kind of a product of Castro Valley, and that there's like a lot of advantages, huge emphasis on education. You're right there in the middle of the Bay Area, so you can go over to San Francisco, you can go to Berkeley, you can be exposed to a lot of art and culture and educational opportunities.
Hmm.
And the community on the whole is very interested in cultivating, students so that they excel. Um, and even just, I want to say, I forgot where I was leading with that. Oh, so Burning Man. So,
Right.
but even in Castro Valley, we had communes when we were like in the 60s and 70s growing up. And
Hmm.
some of them were just like a bunch of, students or hippies living together in a house. But there was this vibe in the air that was very much, we don't have to be in the 50s living in like nuclear families and having like, mom and dad, 2.5 kids, the house, the mortgage, the 9 to 5 job, right?
Yeah.
Um, there were starting to be these different ideas about that. There was, I'm trying to find some of these pictures here. We had in Castro Valley, there was a where we would go shopping was a co-op, and the first co-op was started in Berkeley, um, and it had developed out of a cooperative that people formed in the late 1930s during the Depression, so that they could, instead of having to do with like a grocer, you could pool your resources and have greater bargaining power to get bulk foods, so
Hmm.
people could get better nutrition for less money by using the power of organizing together, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so by the time of the 70s, there was like about 15 different stores all around the Northern California, possibly other cities. I can't remember. But you had, food. They had a kiddie corral where you could have, childcare if you had like a job or you were going to do errands or whatever. They had a credit union. They had like, I think, a tool lending library. So they had like all these facilities for people where you could buy into this co-op, and then you have influence on how it's run, and then you could get a lot of these goods and services at a cheaper rate, right? Is this
Right.
very similar to just like unions generally? But people were experimenting with that type of thing. You had like the Black Panthers in Oakland,
Hmm.
and they were, very influential. A lot of people think about these days about the fact that they were founded in what I think 73, that it was like a mutual aid and community protection society. So at that time in California, you could open carry, so they did, which is
Right.
why you don't have open carry in California anymore, because
Yeah.
the state, right, was really not didn't want a bunch of black people running around with guns. Um,
Hmm.
But the other thing that they were very well known for is they were known for being very pro-education and also, nutrition programs. They had a breakfast program for children. They would help provide food for elderly people in the community. And they were also very big on education. That was another thing in the 1970s. There was a lot more in-person education and, well, like for feminists, right? They'd have like consciousness raising groups where you could get together and talk about these ideas about feminism. Um, and this is the whole idea of like knowledge being and education being a radical force in and of itself. Um, if you look at the history of the United States, if you look at the history of like England and Ireland, right? For a long
Yeah.
time, there's certain people, and it's illegal for them to know how to read and write. If you get caught teaching them, you're a criminal. Why would that be?
Mhm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so there's all these groups and communities, and then it starts to influence the ideas even further of what can we do to further this idea of communities where you're not just like held down by I don't want to say like a standard society or like kind of societal norms. Um,
Right. Right.
there,
Well, I mean, if it's not equitable, where people have the same advantages as other people do elsewhere, then they kind of have to. The system needs to be replaced by a more community-based effort of cooperation. So.
yeah, yeah, and there were also and there still are various businesses that are set up like in the Bay Area as cooperatives or collectives.
Mhm.
It's usually the term that comes around. For example, I didn't know this, but another thing that was very strong in San Francisco at that time was this gets into identity politics. Like we've already got into it, like with the Black Panthers.
Mhm.
Um, but you have a large population of queer people here in the Bay Area, especially in San Francisco. Well, also in Oakland, but that's for like the lesbians. Anyway, um,
Yeah.
but But, I used to when I lived in Oakland in the '90s, I had, like, shorter hair, and I had, like, a lot of hair, so every once in a while, I would, yeah, I had a boyfriend at the time, but it's like, every, like, 6 weeks, I would just, like, take it, like, really short, and then
Yeah.
there'd be a lot of ladies around there be like, "Oh, it's like, "No,
Yeah.
sorry, not on the." They were all very nice.
Yeah.
But you'd have these collective businesses. Anyway, so it turns out that the Stud, which is like a gay bar, a venerable gay institution, in San Francisco, was founded in 1966, and it was founded as a collective. It was the first nightclub that was a collective, right? So this is something where everyone owns like a stake in the business, and you spend a lot of time going to meetings talking about how you're going to run the business. My sister was a member of the Cheese Board Collective, which was a collective that was started in the 60s too in Berkeley, in what they call the gourmet ghetto. They started selling cheese, then they do a lot of baked goods and stuff now. If you get a chance to go there, do. Um, but yeah, so she was involved in that, and it's you spend a lot of time, running the business, right?
Mhm.
Um, and figuring out how you're going to, uh, like you said, how are we going to interact in a way that is equitable and makes sense and so everyone's part of this group enterprise. But there have been a number of these collectives, and then you started to have also because my sister was involved in the cheese board, and then I had sent you, let me see if I can, there is a, now this is getting more into like the 80s or 90s, a culture jamming group called the Billboard Liberation Front. So
Mhm.
they find, billboards, standard corporate billboards, and there was a lot of them around the Bay Area, and then they would, alter them to, make them have a different message. Like, here's one for a Camel cigarettes, and they've altered it to say, "Am I dead yet?" I don't know if this will come through.
Yeah. Well, you
So
just got notifications, so.
yeah, um, so it's kind of a fun thing, but the Billboard Liberation Front is a collective, and
Mhm.
so some of the people who are like in the cheese board were helping to get involved in that, especially this one. If anyone, like if Ted Hand, if you're watching, Eric Davis, if you're watching that one billboard that was down on Durant, I think, uh, and Sacramento, I guess the cheese board people were always altering that particular billboard. Anyway, it ended up being so effective as a form of communication that I guess certain advertisers would try and buy those billboards
Hmm.
and then try and think of something that would make like that could be easily altered, so to be something snazzy,
Yeah, yeah,
like continuing the marketing. It's kind of like 11-dimensional marketing. Let's make
yeah.
a billboard that they're really going to want to do a good job on, so we get more
That's
publicity.
funny. Yeah, it's funny because I remember at one point seeing a billboard that had a picture of John Wayne on it, and
Mhm.
it said, I don't remember what it was for, but the quote on it said, "Never cared much for quitters." And I'm like, well, if you had quit smoking, when
Yeah.
I think the billboard next to it was like like need help quitting smoking or something, like, so I mean it was kind of already there, but it was just really funny to me that they put this quote from him on there, and I'm just like, well, this dude like died of lung cancer because he smoked 5 packs a day.
Oh, geez. Yeah, 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 but that's the
Right,
type of thing where, when you've
right,
had that kind of juxtaposition or whatever, it sticks more in your mind, right?
right, yeah. So I mean, yeah, but I love that kind of culture jamming stuff. And I mean, nowadays we kind of get like memes and viral things on the internet and stuff, but to have it in your physical location is just so much, more effective, at least for the people there, that are there to see it,
Yeah, and it has a way where it kind of seeps into your life more kind of unaware or under the surface in a way
Hmm.
where it's kinda a little bit more subliminal. Because one of the, things that I wanted to talk about was when we moved up to Castro Valley, we joined a Unitarian church. Now, the Unitarians tend to be, more on the left, and this was like a radical left Unitarian church.
Okay.
So, first of all, we got exposed to, like, a lot of, political radicalism and stuff, like Angela Davis.
Hmm.
Her after she had well, let's see. Um, so in 1970 now, speaking of media, physical stuff. So we grew up, our parents always got the newspaper. We'd read the newspaper every morning. We would watch TV. We'd have the radio on listening to news. Um, so when I was oh, the Panthers were founded in 1966.
Okay.
Uh, okay. So in about was that about I think it was like 1971 or something. Anyone listening, you're gonna wanna check my, my, dates on these things and do your own research because, I've been having, neurological issues probably due to lupus and some other stuff, and so my brain doesn't work that great, which is why I especially appreciate Matt doing this with me
Yeah.
because I need help with my brain. Um, there was a prison called Soledad, uh, um, jeez, a prison down in Soledad, which is more of like kind of a rural, agricultural area that's more kind of down towards like Santa Cruz, but inland of that.
Okay.
And there was a guy, George Jackson, I think. I don't know why I wrote all these things here. Da, 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 da. He had he was a black guy. He was pretty young, and he had been imprisoned in this Soledad prison. Um, what was happening was that and this is something that we still have a problem with these days. I don't know why the dog is doing that. You will
Uh,
have prison guards, and they will inflame tensions between racial groups, right? You have everyone, they're in prison, they're not enjoying it. You can get a lot of violent people in there. You can have a lot of problems with conditions, and then guards can work to help calm things down, or they can really make things a lot worse. So they were saying that that there had these prisoner guards had been, they were suing them because they were inciting uh, fights between prisoners of different races. Um, and George Jackson ended up having a lot of his writing a lot of letters about prison conditions and stuff, and mailing them out, and then his letters were being published.
Mhm.
But not much was happening with this whole case or anyone's prison conditions being made better. And so in I think it was 1971, his brother, who was only like 17 at the time, Jonathan Jackson, I think, uh, he and a couple of other guys went to the the Marin County Civic Center, where a judge was sitting who was in charge of his brother's case, and he took the judge hostage with like a shotgun under his chin, and demanded the release of his brother. And the police responded to that, and it ended up killing Jonathan Jackson, the judge, and I think one or two other people. So it was like a really shocking thing, because it's like, Marin is a pretty Tony neighborhood anyway. Like, a lot
Mhm.
of people have a lot of money there, and to have someone just walk into the courthouse, and just a kid, and take a judge hostage like that. It was a very shocking experience, and especially to read about it in the newspaper. But then when you hear what he was upset about, I mean, you could really see, yeah, this is a terrible um situation, and it should not be. Uh and this, they weren't getting any redress for it. And yeah, and it was terrible. And then they all ended up getting killed by the police. So I'm like reading about this as a kid, and then we were in this very radical church, and Angela Davis was a lawyer and a professor at UCLA, who was very radical left lady,
Mhm.
very intelligent, well-educated, uh, well-spoken person. Um, it turned out that well, that was her the FBI wanting her, because it turned out that her one of her firearms had been used in this hostage taking situation. So she was on the lam for a while, and then she got caught, and she was pretty much acquitted of counts. It turned out that the young man, Jonathan Jackson, was one of her bodyguards, I guess. Um,
Mhm.
so it seems like she didn't have any knowledge that that all that was going to go down, but she got caught up in it later. But we're in the type of a church where we had her lawyer come to speak at the church about her case, when it was
Yeah.
still ongoing, Angela Davis's case. And then mom and dad were pretty prominent in the church, so we had this lawyer and her family over for lunch afterwards. I was about 9 or something. Um, so you got like exposed to. It's like one thing to see it on the news. It's another thing when it's like person who's intimately involved in that, and their family comes over to your house, and they're at your church speaking. Um, but we also, so in that church, they were very involved in, like, the organizing for the United Farm Workers, which is a union for people who do farm work here in California, so that they have better conditions, so that they have, porta potties, so they're not, using the restroom in the fields, which is degrading for them. And also, guess what? It's not, like, super healthy for the food
Right.
supply. You'd
Yeah.
think it would
Yeah.
be sensible. Um, I'm gonna go see if I can. I don't know where anyone is.
Okay.
Olive, what are you doing? And so, they were doing a lot of, what do you call it when you don't buy stuff from boycotts, and organizing to get better representation at that time, and my, parents were and the church was very active in that. Another thing that happened around, 71 to 73, and this is interesting because it gets into the intersection of all these things, right? You have like identity, you have the legal field, you have physical action. Um, so there was a takeover of the island of Alcatraz, which it used to be a federal prison because
Hmm.
it's right. Let's see. Oh my gosh. So if you look there, there's this whole bay here, and Alcatraz is kind of like right here. So it's miles to any land around there. And
Hmm.
this is the Pacific Ocean, right? It's super cold. It's super deep. You get a lot. It's very rough. And it's like pouring right into the Golden Gate here, right at Alcatraz. So that's why, no one basically has ever escaped from there because, um, it's very easy to die from hypothermia or getting bashed on the rocks or swept out to the real ocean, and then you're completely screwed.
Yeah.
Mm.
Right.
So, uh, anyway, so it turned out that there were some American Indian activists, and they were looking at legal stuff regarding their status and land in the United States, and they found a law and or regulation, and what it was basically saying was that you had here you go, abandoned surplus federal land would revert to the native peoples. So at that point, this was in November 1969, Alcatraz, the federal prison, was considered abandoned federal surplus land. So you had like about 80 people went over there and occupied it
Mm.
as Indian land for about I don't know, it was like about a year and a half. Big deal because it's not like out in the middle of nowhere. This is like right next to Baghdad by the day, right? San
Yeah.
Francisco, um, major urban area. Yeah, so that's what the American Indian movement, I believe, grew out of that. So my church was very involved in trying to spread awareness about this and the aims of the people, what they were doing. And it's interesting too, because they had, in that time and place, you had a lot of radio stations. And they had started a pirate radio station for Alcatraz, the occupation. So it was Radio Free Alcatraz.
Hmm.
And it became influential. So you'd have these radio stations that you could tune into that were more radical politically. Because people, they think they um, will hear a lot of today's people like the idea of like old pirate radio stations, people playing music, or like old like Art Bell or something.
Right.
Um, weird stuff, which I liked as well, although I never listened to Art Bell. But a lot of that kind of use of radio grew out of these radical movements, right? Another radio station that was very influential as far as both art and politics in Berkeley was KPFA, Pacifica Radio. Why is it called Pacifica? Not just because we're by the Pacific Ocean, it's because it was come up with as an idea by a bunch of people who were interned together as conscientious objectors to the Second World War here in the United States.
Yeah.
Um, so they were thinking, how can we get more information out there about the politics of pacifism? So when they got out, there was a lot of free space on the FM part of the dial. And so they decided to start an FM radio station in Berkeley. And I guess they did it as well. This is also kind of a collective thing. They would, people could subscribe to the station, right? Like nowadays, everyone's like sick of getting pledges from NPR and stuff, right? Well, this is part of what started that whole
Yeah.
option. And
I
then
mean,
that
FM was only just really coming into use at that point
when you
commercially,
bought a
right? Yeah. So
subscription, they give you a radio that could get FM because no one had FM radios.
right. So
When
FM
those,
radio was kind of a joke at first because if you're getting played there, only a limited amount of people would hear you, right?
yeah, yeah.
Makes me think of the Steely Dan song.
Which one is that?
FM. There's a song
Oh,
called FM. Nothing but blues and Elvis and somebody else's favorite song.
that was great. I don't know. I know all the pervy ones. Um, which We're fans of the Dan.
Yeah,
But anyway,
we
so
stand the Dan on this show.
yeah, yeah. But, so you had, like, Pacifica, getting people more into listening to FM, and then you have these offshoots where it's a lot of, like, weird stuff, or, Pacifica, or KPFA did a lot of, like, world music, experimental music, that type of stuff, as well as political stuff. They also had a lot of, people who, were, active in the Lincoln Brigade, fighting fascists in the Spanish Civil War, who ended up, kind of washing back up on the American shores, or a lot of those people went to Mexico and stuff. But you had like various artists like Conlon Nancro, who was a how do I explain him? He was a composer for player piano, because he made these very avant-garde, not just kind of
Yeah.
avant-garde, very avant-garde, piano pieces that couldn't really be played humanly, and had to do with a lot of mathematics, um, and, kind of competing time signatures that would weave in and out of one another ones. It's very similar in some ways to, like, coding, um, and,
The polyrhythmic
yes,
stuff that was
yeah,
like music concrete, you know?
y
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and, so he, was interesting because he's fought in the Spanish Civil he fought with the Lincoln Brigade, couldn't come back to the United States, stayed in Mexico where he's doing all this avant-garde music, but he was able to be supported by people who were, like, um, involved in pacifist peace movements that were organized through places, nexuses like, Pacifica Radio, KPFA. Um
Mhm.
which was, housed in Berkeley. Now they have, like, a new building. Well, it's, like, 30 years old now, a newer building, but they have, like, this kinda craptastic space on Shattuck Avenue back in the day. But it was fun because they did a lot of, volunteer work as well. Um, so you could, volunteer at the station. A lot of different people, would have, shows there and stuff, everything from, like, avant-garde to call-in, to, music, poetry, um, alternative forms of medicine. Alan Watts did, like, series of lectures that were broadcast on, KPFA, and, are now in their archives. Um, yeah, so you see a lot of, that place where you see kinda like technology, political activism, alternate forms of, organizing human interaction, the arts, come together in these, kinda, nexuses in,
Right.
in there. Uh,
Yeah, it's always, great to see how those interrelate, and especially, like, avant-garde art, or, like, uh, let's say, eccentric personalities, plus, like, because, I mean, San Francisco is also the home of Emperor Norton, like, way back, like, a century earlier, so
and he's far from the
yeah.
weirdest person. No, but definitely, that's another thing, is that you start to kinda have these, areas where you start to have these, like, notable weirdos, and they kinda attract more of their own kind. Like, if you're interested in this stuff, then you think, "Well, I is it possible for me to get over to this area where there's more of these weirdos that are doing stuff that I think is interesting?"
Mhm.
Um, for now, the church that I was in Hayward, one of we had, some, people who are active in the church, Audrey and Corbin Lapel, and Audrey, she's a really wonderful, beautiful, sweet, amazing person, and, I was lucky to know her. She was very politically active. She's real sweet, great cook, and we spent a lot of time over there. She was more active in the church. Her husband, Corbin, was a art professor up at Cal State Hayward. Now, Corbin and Audrey had, originally been from Nebraska, and, they'd gone to art school with, Bruce Conner, and his wife, Jean. Actually, they introduced the 2 of them.
Mhm.
Bruce and Jean were both, artists. I think Jean is still alive. She's, like, in her 90s. Um, but so I would be like a little girl, and I was interested in art, and music. Uh, I was interested in everything, but we'd be going over there, and so, like, Corbin would always be, like, doing his art and drawing and be, talking about art and talking about his friend Bruce Conner, who I don't know why, it's, like, only about, like, 3 or 4 years ago, I was, like, looking I thought, "Well, I should look into this Bruce Conner because I always really liked his stuff," and then I was like, "Oh god, I guess he was, like, a bigger deal than I thought." I don't know why I would feel like such a dork,
I
but,
mean, do you have a thumbnail on Bruce Conner for listeners? That just
he started in Nebraska, and one of his first pieces that he exhibited was this was, during the '50s, um, he got a draft deferment, and he exhibited his draft deferment as, like, a political piece. He went on to become associated with the Beats in San Francisco, did a lot of assemblage art, did a lot of experimental art. He did, collage movies. He's one of the first people to do collage movies. One of his most, I forget what it's called, but he has one that's like 30 minutes long, and it's just collage of, um, movies of, various atomic tests, and it was like an anti-atomic war, anti,
right.
nuclear
Yeah.
statement and peace. Um, he, uh, he worked with, like, like, Brian Eno, Devo, working, making some of those, videos and stuff with those guys.
Mhm.
This was a fun crossover for
Yeah,
me.
that's where I remember seeing, like, mushroom clouds and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, I walked
yeah,
into that, yeah, yeah.
yeah. Um,
Very subgenius too. There's a subgenius thread going through all that, yeah. So,
yeah,
yeah.
and, he he also, was a big kinda hoaxer too because he would kinda he hoaxed his death, like, 2 or 3 times before he actually died. It was funny because 'cause I'd be like a little girl, and I see actually, I have a okay, this isn't gonna look like anything, but this is a piece by Corbin. He would do these, like, real intricate, pen and
Mhm.
ink drawings. You can see how small it is. I don't know. I was thinking some of the John Dee obsidian mirror people might like this because it's just kinda like a black circle.
Yeah, yeah.
But he'd be sitting there, like, working on stuff like this and talking about stuff, and I remember him talking about, when he and Bruce were in college and they didn't wanna get drafted, and so they had a professor friend of theirs write a letter about how, what delicate, sweet, um, basically implying they were gay guys they were, and he really couldn't be up to the rigors of the army and blah, 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 and put sent the letter off with the stamp with the American flag upside down, and they got
Mhm.
these deferments. So I remember hearing about that as I was growing up, and I would be like 10 or 12, and then
Yeah,
recently finding out that actually that deferment letter was like this big political art piece that
yeah,
Bruce did way before I was born. But that's part of what I wanted to get across in talking about this stuff is that it was just like being around and being a person around in that time. You're just there's so many people there who are into this stuff, and you're running into them in like these kind of weird ways and finding out about it. Um, but yeah, so Bruce Connery was actually very influential on me in that way. Actually, later I did go on to study art with Corbin Lapel. Um, and we had, other hoaxers and, interesting people might, find, Clayton Bailey is kind of a fun guy, for this type of thing. He
mhm,
was in the, Cal State Hayward art department as well, and he'd make a lot of, like, these robots and show them, and, there was one like the Marilyn Monroe robot. It was like these big, kinda like rockets for boobs and everything with lighting up, and he used to have, like, a museum of of robots, and then he had this great thing where he's, like, talking about Bigfoot. This is, like, in I think the '80s or '90s or something. He was a ceramic artist as well, and, so he was like, "Wow, did you know that there used to be, like, these giant, kinda like Bigfoot people that lived in our area, and actually, would you believe it or not, there's one, like, kinda just in my backyard here in Crockett, and so he's doing this whole thing like it's like a journalists coming over to talk to him. And it's like, oh yeah, because this is ceramic cyclop, huge person that he's made, skeleton, fossil. He's kind of somewhat buried in his backyard. He's wearing like that pith helmet. He's like, oh yeah, we've just been digging this up. I mean, it's kind of what a coincidence. It's just like right here, but it's just it's like this
Yeah.
stupid, but it's really funny. And yeah, so just like people like that. So you get these kind of ideas coming in, but you're not, I don't know. It's like in a way, if you're reading about something in the paper or you're being taught in a class or you're reading in a history book, it's kind of like, okay, this is the way I'm going to take this in, that it's just happening. This is like history, as opposed to just kind of like running across these ideas like on the fly. Another example of this is there was there's a lot of people in Berkeley and Oakland who do art cars, but also art houses. Um, there is a artist called Mark Bullwinkle, and he's since become nationally, probably internationally known. He, I believe, helped start a school in Oakland called the Crucible, and it has everything to do with fire arts. So everything from like flame throwing to fire breathing to fire performance to welding, glass work, everything. So you can go there and take uh, classes. Before that, like in the 70s and 80s, we would go over to Berkeley. At a certain point, I was going to school there, working there, or living there, and you'd just be like walking around a lot
Mhm.
just for exercise, and just we don't have any money to like go anyplace.
Yeah.
And you would come, you'd be walking down the street, and I don't know if people can see this very well. This is from the 70s, and this is another thing that's weird because I'd always had this very strong memory. This is how I ran across Mark Bullwinkle's work, but there was no pictures that I could find online until, like, literally just the last few months. And Mark Bullwinkle talks about this on his website. You can go, there's a lot more pictures there, and he's fun to read about as an artist and stuff, but he didn't have any pictures of his house, until someone had found them recently and shared them with him. But he would make, cutouts. He would use, like, a welding cutter and cut out, I don't know, like, metal, like, about this thick, metal that
Hmm.
rusts, and he'd cut out, like, these cartoon shapes and stuff. Anyway, so he got into a thing where he ended up putting them all around his house.
Okay.
So that is like like a standard bungalow, but it's just, like, covered with all this rusting art everywhere where you can't even see the house. This one gives you a little better feeling. You can see that they're, like, these wonderful shapes,
Yeah.
and they're,
Yeah.
like,
Like
great.
almost like big gears and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, very expressive. You could see there was, like, the sidewalk. I mean, and you just, I don't know, you could just be, like, 14 and you're walking down the street, it's like, "What the hell?"
Yeah.
This is a clearer picture.
Okay. Yeah.
So, it's just like, okay, this is the type of thing, and it was not considered, like, super unusual, like, there wasn't, like, a huge fight in the city about it or anything. At a certain point, he just took it all down, because artists do what they do. But, it's not like always a very structured thing. It could be more, well, like the flaneurs, right? Or the situationists, where you're just kind of like walking through a city and then
Yeah.
see what
Yeah.
you're going to see. I had lived in a house on the Elmwood for a number of years with my boyfriend, who was an artist, and his mom, his grandmother. Um, and it's actually, I found out recently while I was telling you, it was just a couple of blocks literally from where Patty Hearst got kidnapped as part of like the big politically motivated violence of the 70s and 60s. Um, but she had a lovely house and a lovely garden. I still have some of her plants. But I was walking down by there. This was probably about 15 years ago, and her neighbor across the street, who I found out later, I talked to him, and he had known her. I don't know. He had the front of his house, and he had everything done up in like these, I don't know, all these kind of structures and kinda like whirligigs, but, like, stuff with personal meaning to him about, like, his family history and stuff. And this
Yeah.
is just like, there was a lot of, foliage and trees in the front of his yard, and then just all this stuff. And then,
Those kind of look like flying saucers, though. Yeah.
they kinda do, and then on top of that, it was really beautiful, he had it all lit up at night. You'd be walking around,
Hmm.
and it'd just be all lit up
Wow.
like this in his front yard. But the most
Yeah.
fun part was that he had, like, these fruit trees out there in front, and so, you'd be walking, and then he had, like, one tree with, like, a big limb that was probably about 12 feet up, and he put, like, a bicycle seat on there, and so he'd just be, like, hanging up, like, sitting on this bicycle seat, just kinda, like, lounging up there, but, of course, you couldn't see because there would be so many leaves and everything, so you'd be looking around, and then you might hear something that's like, "What?
Yeah.
This guy's just, like, up in the tree." But it was nice to see him because, you know, he'd known, my boyfriend's grandmother, Mary Hirano, and, so we were able to reminisce about her. But the other thing is that there was just, like, a ton of, education and, art opportunities. This is, like, in the '60s and '70s for kids. In the '90s, you had, George, W. Bush, and he had this whole thing of, "We're just gonna have reading, writing, and arithmetic," and they called it "No Child Left Behind," and what they did was they stripped out a lot of extracurricular activities from schools, and also a lot of humanities education.
Mm.
But when we were there, we had a lot of that, and I've told you before, just in my own, class at high school, we have, some pretty prominent, musicians. Well, David Glass, who I went to he was a piano player and composer, and, we went from the time we were, like, in elementary school up, because I played tuba, and we were always playing together. We had, just in school, we'd have, band, orchestra, jazz band, you'd have, like, quartets, pep bands, and then,
Mhm.
we'd have, musical you'd do, like, musical, Oklahoma or whatever once a year.
Yeah, right.
So you'd be, like, every day, like, a couple of hours tooting away with these people, so you get to know them pretty well. But he was a piano player, and, it was so fun because, I don't know, he was tall, and he had, like, big hair, big blonde hair,
Mhm.
um, and y I don't know if you know, we used to have those, upright pianos, but they're, like, on casters so you can roll them around.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so, of course, they're always, like, in really excellent tune because they're getting, like, hauled all over the school.
Yeah.
But this
Yeah,
is
there's
after.
a name for those, and it's not coming to me, but I feel like that's kinda what you'd find in most schools, especially in the little practice rooms and things like that, is
Yeah,
upright. That's what it's called,
yeah,
an upright piano. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So he was it was a lot of fun because you just, like, play, ragtime, like,
Mhm.
uh, Scott Joplin tunes and everything, like, super fast because we were in, like, junior high school. It was really fun, but he, has become a piano teacher and a composer, and I guess he has been making some experimental films that, the one in particular has been kinda making the circuit and doing very well internationally, David Glass. We also had this is another guy I went from, very young up through, the end of high school with, Jeff Beal, and he is like a jazz composer, plays trumpet, and he was always very ambitious, and very talented and worked super hard. But he has won Grammys for he composed music for like that series on Rome and then House
Okay.
of Cards,
Oh, wow.
and just done some other TV shows where he's, yeah, pretty prominent. It's funny because my it's like these people that you went to school with, so you know them really well.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's like not it's like a different type of way of knowing someone,
Yeah,
as opposed to, like, when you
it's
meet
just
them
kinda
later.
weird. Yeah.
'Cause my
Yeah,
brother, because we just I mean, we probably spent, like, 20, 30 hours together a week for 10 years, right?
yeah, right.
All this playing and stuff, and, so my brother had played trombone, the peak of male masculinity.
I was gonna ask if there were any famous tromboners from your school, but
So I guess my brother was listening to, like, TV, like House of Cards, like,
Yeah.
when it first came out, and he's like, "Wait, that sounds like Jeff Beal." He looked it up and it was.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
cool.
my I I feel kinda bad for Jeff Beal because I could tell he's been very successful and he's worked incredibly hard for it, but I don't think it was fun for him being with all of us, um, because, well, I don't know. I can be a pain in the ass and run my mouth and be
No,
oh,
not
yeah, not
you.
me. So I, I mean, Jeff, he was always very, sincere and worked hard and focused and everything, and then, he'd be surrounded with people like me. So they made me join pep band to play in the stands at the football
Mhm.
games that we had.
Yeah, I had to
Um,
do that in high school. Yeah.
yeah, so this is probably, like, around '76 or something, so it wasn't too long after the Vietnam War had ended, and I was very pacifist, very anti-war, and I was like, "I don't wanna do this kind of, jingoistic, quasi-nationalistic bullshit playing for your stupid football." They're
Right.
like, "You have to do this or else you're gonna flunk." It's like, Okay, so I'm up in the stands and, they had the first half and it's the second half is coming. And so I asked Jeff, I'm like, "Hey, Jeff, can I borrow your, trumpet?" He's like, "Sure." So, the other team runs out on the field, and then our team starts running out on the field, so I started playing taps, and I just
Yeah.
do you know that meme where it's like the guy's trying to get to the microphone and everyone's, like, jumping on him? It was
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
"Stephanie, how could you do that?" Anyway,
Yeah.
so he wasn't, like, super excited about that, but, we had those opportunities. And then our most famous class member was I went if like, I knew him, I wasn't good friends with him or anything, and he was playing a different type of music, but Cliff Burton, the, bassist for Metallica.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah, he was in your graduating class? Yeah.
yeah, I went to high
Yeah,
school
okay.
with him.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
it's funny to see him
I knew
in,
you went to the same school, but I didn't know it was the same
yeah.
graduating class. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, like, we knew each other to know each other. I didn't we weren't, like, close friends or anything, but yeah, for a few years, and it's weird to see footage of him and stuff because he just looked the same as he did in school, basically.
Yeah,
Um,
he for heavy metal of that time, for people that don't know, the thrash metal stuff and the early Metallica, because I think he's on the first couple albums, and generally considered to be like one of the best bass players
ever.
that
Yeah.
heavy metal had. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, he didn't do the metal look. If anything, he looked kind of like early Black Sabbath because he would wear like bell bottoms and like kind of like ragged shirt and just like the longer hair. Like he didn't do like the heavy metal like spandex or anything like that. He didn't really do. And it wasn't necessarily trying to look like a tough guy. He looked more like kind of like a stoner or something, you know? Yeah,
Yeah, that's basically what he looked like, and he
yeah,
always just had, like, a great always he was kinda tall and lanky, and he always just had, like, a big smile. He had the sweetest smile. That's how kinda like how I always think of him. And when he's, like, on stage or he's not, like, doing a lot of the mannerisms or anything, he just, like,
right,
play like a fucking demon.
yeah.
But
I
but anyway,
mean, for people that don't listen to metal, just look up the video of him playing, or the track from their first album, "Kill 'Em All." Yeah, there's a track called "Anesthesia," "Pulling Teeth,"
yeah.
and that's just like a gigantic bass solo, basically with distortion, and it's gonna give you an idea what we're talking about.
Yeah, and
But he
it
was
and
on all their big albums like Master of Puppets and all that other. Yeah,
yeah.
so
Well, and the thing that's interesting to me is that he has a definite callback to, oh god, now I'm really gonna the guy who, played the national anthem and set his guitar on fire.
Jimi Hendrix.
Thank you. Because he has a callback to that performance of Jimi Hendrix in that solo, that anesthesia solo. Um,
Yeah, but
because
that was also in. Oh, what festival was that? Now I'm having a brain fart.
yeah, it was I want was it Woodstock?
I mean, he did it at Woodstock, but he did kind of a I think he did a different one in San Francisco somewhere.
It was
Oh,
Monterey
Monterey,
Jazz.
Monterey.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Monterey.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
Monterey Pop. Yeah,
That's it. Yeah.
but at that time he played Wild Thing and he was like humping his amplifier and everything, and then set his
As you
guitar on fire.
do.
But yeah, as one does. But yeah, that it's a great video of that, and I think that was kind of the test run for. I don't know if he actually did it at Woodstock. He played the national anthem at Woodstock, but
Mm.
the fire setting, I'm not really sure. I think he did
Yeah,
both.
I
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, you must have done both. I'm getting my Jimi Hendrix stuff mixed up in my head now.
Embarrassing. But yeah, so, like, all this kinda stuff was, like, in the air, and the thing was is that there was, we had all those, like, regular music classes. We had, like, a lot of community, music classes. I mean, and this is just for, like, music, you could, go, well, I was in the Oakland Symphony Youth Orchestra. And, so Oakland had an orchestra, they still do, and then they have a youth orchestra, which, draws from, it's like a full orchestra, and it draws from, like, the whole Greater Bay Area. We had,
Mm,
friends in there. There was a lady who played harp who was from Marin, all the East Bay, Berkeley, Oakland, and it was by merit, so you had people, a lot of people there who were of, very, uh, wealthy backgrounds, but then you had a number of people too who were, from real creepy backgrounds or like not so wealthy backgrounds, but because you had these school-based and community-based programs, right? They were able to
mhm.
support people who had talent and an interest in pursuing these things, right?
Right,
I
right, and this kind of
was,
has echoes with what people disparagingly call DEI now, where it doesn't have anything to do with like preferential treatment. You have to have the talent too, and
yeah,
giving somebody, an opportunity that they might not have otherwise had.
yeah,
But
and
merit based, like you're talking about,
that
you had to put
that
the
is
work in. Yeah.
that is the thing is that there was this idea that had come out at the end of the Second World War that, okay, you have all these, people that, guys who had, sacrificed for the nation, and that we should, give back by supporting them, like, with the, programs where veterans could go to college and have it paid
Yeah,
for, things
GI
like that.
Bill. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And then also, uh, like with Kennedy and the space program and stuff, and the Cold War, you start to have this idea that we, as a nation, should try and cultivate the best talent, try and cultivate an educated and aware populace as a way of building the nation, right?
It's so
And
wild to hear that kind of stuff now and read what they were saying back then. They were so optimistic in a lot of ways. And even if some of it, like beneath the surface, had some nefarious stuff going on, which most certainly did, and even if it wasn't as equitable as it seemed, um, that kind of optimism and that kind of goal setting is something that we just don't have anymore. It's not even nearly on the table because they're way too cynical for that shit now. But I mean,
well, and
they
it's
were,
been deliberately torn down.
yeah, and it's deliberately been dismantled, and
Yeah,
hope has been crushed on purpose,
yeah.
by the elites. But yeah, I mean, it's wild to think about some of the things that were going on back then in the name of science and discovery and creating a better world. And I heard something recently about like an actual sea lab, like an underwater sea lab, where
Mhm.
they were just living underwater for like a month in this like
Yeah.
bathing suit. And I was like, I thought that was just like a cartoon from the '60s, Sea Lab, but that was a real thing that was going on. And it was like, it's fascinating to hear stuff like that because you're just like, wow. And I talked about this a little bit in the episode I did with John Tenney when we were talking about King Kong versus Godzilla, because that's the world that lives in, where it's just the United Nations is like a thing where they're just like checking up on the latest science. Like, what are the scientists up to? Let's touch base with this scientist in this country, So, and they have a space station. It's just a cooperative planet Earth space station, and like
Yeah.
there's no nations really, you know. Um, Like, I would love for that to be a thing, and it just seems like it's so naive to think that way, and I think it's not beyond the pale for us to think that way, and it really, like, we kind of need to again, or at our, dismiss the idea at our peril, because otherwise, what's the alternative? World War III. We're just looking at blowing each other off the map. So
It yeah, 'cause, like with the youth orchestra, I was telling you the other day that there's a lady, she currently is, on the staff at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. I was in Oakland Symphony Youth Orchestra, my sister was in there too, along with her younger sister, and so their mom would want to carpool and, take us there, which was, like, about half an hour on the highway, or the freeway there and back. The thing was is that their mom was a widow and they were, there was about 5 kids, all super smart, super talented, interesting, creative. Their
mhm,
mom was just absolute sweetheart, but they were, like, super duper poor. Like, poor, like, she had this crappy old car and the doors on the one side were, like, tied shut with rope.
mhm,
But because you had these merit-based programs and the community was interested in, furthering these, activities, and they would support people, you have someone who comes from that poor of a background able to succeed, um,
mhm,
in their profession, and, she's an excellent excellent teacher and, wonderful cellist. Um And it's kinda sad thinking about Cliff because if people don't know, he died I guess he was about 26, he was on tour, and, there was a crash and he was killed, um, and since then, his dad only passed, a couple 3 years ago, I think. He was in his
mhm.
90s, but his dad was very involved in the metal scene, very involved in, musical education, and he put all of, the, what do you call it, the residuals?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
money that he
The
made
royalties. Yeah, yeah.
royalties towards, sponsoring music education in Castro Valley because, thanks to George W. Bush, they pulled a lot of those programs, so they weren't available to
George
kids.
H.W. Bush, to be clear, because
Ye yeah, well,
her
yeah, both of 'em, yeah, yeah, thank you. Um,
yeah, just
well,
because, you were saying the '90s, so it had to have been the
I
senior
know,
Bush.
that's why I have you here. But, yeah, so it's really kinda crappy, but, but it
But
was
yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize that a lot of these programs in schools, like, rely on foundations, like
yeah,
nonprofit foundations that are supplying money. Like in my school growing up, we had like the Elton Drew Foundation. I really don't know who Elton Drew was, but he was like a guy that was around, and it left a
yeah,
bequest of money to the school so that we could continue to have band, or performing arts workshop or chorus or any of those things. So
yeah.
yeah.
But, yeah, so anyway, so I played tuba. I was in the youth orchestra for about all high school, so it was 4 years, and, yeah, yeah, I mean, it was a great opportunity, just the music, meeting these other people, spending time in Oakland where, I grew to love that town, I gotta tell you. It was a
Mhm,
little grittier, um,
mhm,
than Castro Valley. I got to see more of, what it was like for Black people, uh,
mhm,
and, in poor areas. My dad also worked in Oakland a lot, so we saw more of that. Saw what was happening with the Oakland Police Department. But one of the things that they did for Oakland Symphony Youth Orchestra is, like, every couple of years, they would do a lot of fundraising and then be able to, send us on a European tour. So I was able to go
wow,
to Germany, yeah, when I was 15 for a month. And then when I was 18, we went to, like, Italy and a little bit of Switzerland for a couple weeks. And, it was really cool. But it was interesting too because this was, like, the height of the Cold War, or the end of the Cold War, but I spent a week in Germany a month in Germany and a week in Berlin when it was still divided, when the wall was still up.
right,
So
yeah,
interesting because I've definitely been on the left side of the spectrum, so I figured that a fair amount of what I heard about, like, Russia and stuff was well, at that point, it was the Soviet Union, um, was kinda like anti-communist horseshit, which a lot of it
Mhm.
was. But at the same time, it's like you go there and you see the wall, it's like, "Man, this is pretty seriously fucked up." 'Cause
Yeah, right. I can
I
only
mean
imagine living there during that time, and, like,
I
what
mean, that was one
the
of the first times I got, like, a gun pointed at me.
yeah,
Because we're like, we're like, "Oh, yeah, little cute, Americans," and the Eastern Germans, they did not care if you were, put their the our minders, the adults were like, "Don't put a camera up." One of the kids
yeah,
did, and all of a sudden, you could see that, they're and there was, like, people that's terrible. It was not just a wall. It is just like big concrete, smooth wall. Area where you have like a dog run, area where it's salted with landmines, barbed wire. Um,
mhm,
so you're looking across this, and you can see where people had tried to get over, and they would just shoot them, and there'd just be like a leg hanging in the barbed wire.
jeez,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was pretty bad. So,
Well, and for listeners, like, if you think it can't happen here, um,
well,
I think people
exactly.
are becoming more more aware that that very well could happen here, but
Yeah, and it's not just because I mean, it wasn't just because they were, dirty communists. I mean, it's an authoritarian, surveillance regime. If
right.
people wanna look into the Stasi in East Germany, they had, like, pretty much half the country spying on the other half of the country. How do we know this?
Mhm,
Because when the wall fell and people started looking at everything, they had kept all these paper records of everything,
mhm,
of all these spying, so you have I mean, I'm not exaggerating. They had,
yeah,
like, he everyone was spying on everyone else. It was
yeah.
horrible. It's a terrible way to live. Um, but,
Well,
we got to the
nowadays
extent
we just have
Mhm.
nowadays we just have oligarchs that already know everything about us because we tell all of our deepest, darkest secrets to the internet all the time. So,
Yeah, supposedly. But, yeah, no, and it shows up the, importance of having, like, different methods of communicating and maintaining, community and communication. Um depending upon, what's the technology, who knows what. I mean, that's a whole level of spycraft and resistance. Um,
mhm,
but then we were able to go when I was the last year that I was in Oakland Symphony Youth Orchestra was like 79 to 1980. And it's another thing where you just kind of end up or just around and then get exposed to stuff because we had a new conductor, Robert Hughes, and so we did some recording of some avant-garde music at this one place, but then we had to record another part of it, and the only studio that they could find was, Francis Ford Coppola has that Flatiron Building in San Francisco. So we were
mhm,
recording in the studio in that building, which was pretty fun, except for like, we're all like, the brass section. So it's pretty I don't they had, like, a nice rug or something on the floor, and so we're kinda like, at a certain point, like, spit
yeah,
again. So we're
yeah.
like,
You got to empty that spit valve. Yeah.
"Oh my god."
For
So
people that have never played a brass instrument, maybe not know this, but yeah, there spit gets inside the instrument and it sounds bad after a while, and you actually have to open a little valve at the
let it
bottom
out.
and then, yeah, just drip it out. Yeah, and it just
We're
goes right
like
on the carpet or the floor or wherever.
yeah. So that
But
was interesting. But then we ended
yeah,
up having a visiting artist who was Laurie Anderson, um, who is a composer and performance artist, is very
yeah,
avant-garde. And this was she actually premiered one of her pieces with us, at the Paramount Theater in Oakland. Um, my brother is cooler than all of us if you're a Laurie Anderson fan because my sister and I were in the orchestra, and then when, it came time to perform, Laurie needed someone to, turn, pages of music for her when she was at the
yeah.
piano. So she asked my brother, so he did.
Well, that's the perks of being a tromboner. But
Yeah, so that was a way to, just, like, find out, and, I guess, right after she had been performing with us, she went on tour with, William Burroughs.
yeah, yep,
So, yeah, so it was kinda like a we'd never heard of her before or anything, but it was it's like a great way to find out about that, and then I more than her art per se, for me, I thought she was very interesting as a person, just how she was as a leader,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
and so, and that's really, like a great opportunity to get that, but that type of thing doesn't happen unless there's, like, this kinda impetus and, action in the community to create these, environments and events where, you can cultivate young people in these type of, situations, so, uh but it shows, collective action. It shows, I think, like the role of art in just like, opening, how do I want to say it? Like opening your mind to different possibilities of how we can
yeah.
live. There's, for example, like the San Francisco Mime Troupe is probably one of the big examples of this. That they were founded in the early '60s um, as like a performance group, but they, do explicitly political performances, and they'll do a lot of stuff on the street, um,
Mm,
critiquing, poking fun at, bringing light to, various issues of the day, some protest stuff, but, there's always, this feedback between it, and some people, like, they get interested in, like, the ideas of, like certain forms of art, but they forget that
yeah,
there's always this, back and forth. I mean, like the Beats, right? They were,
yeah,
rebelling against, you know, the nuclear age, the draft, uh,
mhm,
war. That's
yeah.
where it came out of, the whole idea,
Kind of
identity politics.
materialism in some ways. Yeah.
Mhm.
I mean, City Lights was the bookstore was right there in San Francisco, right?
Oh, yeah,
Yeah,
it's still there, yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, what was I gonna say? It's interesting too because, I think that
Well,
it's
uh,
interesting to talk about, like, these people that are more well-known and stuff, but the
yeah.
thing was, I was actually listening to, ELQ Palmer, I think it is, Magpie Vectors on, Vase, and they
Hmm.
were getting into the thing of, talking about, like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how you have to have, the baser needs satisfied before you move on to creating art, and the beautiful thing about Oakland and Berkeley and San Francisco at that time and place is that, people are well, that's where Philip K. Dick was came from, right? The trash stratum.
Yeah,
People are literally you have people that are on the street, um, people that may not have a fixed address, shall we say, and
yeah,
they're making art. There's a guy who, is in Albany, and he won't make eye contact with anyone. He doesn't have, I don't think, a fixed address, pretty bad circumstances, and what he does is he takes metal, like, cans and stuff out of the trash, has some snippers and some other tools, and he makes, like, these kind of, like, semi-movable robots out of them and sells them, and also
right.
just displays them on the street.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's exactly what I was thinking. I was about to say was people think of art and culture as being kind of like a luxury element and expendable in some ways. Like if you need to cut costs in a government
Yeah,
setting, the arts are the first to go. And people tend to think of it as like, well, if you can afford art, that's good. Or if you have the wherewithal to create because you have time for it, that's a privilege, you know? And in some ways it is, but it's also intrinsic to life. Like nothing moves forward, nothing changes. There's no feeling without art, some semblance of art. And that's a broad um I'm putting a lot of things under the header of art because like there's an art to just about everything. I mean, even if you're just doing a job that seems monotonous, there's an art to doing that effectively, you know. Um, and there's an art to life and to living, you know. And if the more we remove ourselves from these things, I think the more easy it is to become cynical and entrenched in self-defeating attitudes and it's a downward spiral, really, I guess is where I'm going with that.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, and I think that, well, I appreciated, the Super Bowl halftime show, this last one, because I was like, "Finally, one that I get," 'cause, Oakland, you very much had that, a lot of rap artists, a lot of the, gang or drug culture, a lot of, car culture, like, specifically with sideshows, you get they're
Mhm.
very illegal, they're very dangerous,
Mm.
but they're kind of exciting. You get cars and you sometimes people will steal them, other times you'll, trick them out and, you'll be like do like street racing, doing donuts, doing tricks with cars that are very dangerous and people come and watch in an urban area. This would be like a sideshow. Um, but a lot of this is kinda like taking like mundane everyday spaces and, events and just, for kind of forcing art through it. I was
Right.
talking to my mom the other day about, like, the public transit system, Bay Area Rapid Transit. It's kinda like the subway and the L here in the Bay Area, and you have a lot of buskers and then a lot of, like, black guys who will rap and dance, and, you have the straps and the poles to hold on, and so they're just, like, start, like, beatbox. They don't have anything, it's just them, right?
Mhm.
And a hat for the money, right? And they're just, like, doing all this acrobatic gymnastics around all the commuters and everything, and creating
Yep.
this whole kind of, like, art happening without even so much as an instrument,
Mhm.
um, and that's part of what I really love about, Oakland and Berkeley. Berkeley's very much that way as well, and especially when I was there, you'd have, like, a lotta, you know, tens of thousands of students, and then you have all the professors and everything, so all these, like, smart people who, are really passionate about what they're studying, and so you never know, you could be, like, walking down the street and find, like, 2 people, arguing about some arcane aspect of quantum physics, but they both know what the fuck they're talking about.
Right, yeah, yeah. They're not just talking out of their ass about it, no.
Yeah, so
But then you
yes.
also have a lot of, kind of outsider beliefs that come hand in hand with that. Like, I remember you telling me that your dad worked with somebody that was like a breatharian.
Oh
That
my gosh. Well, the guys that my dad worked with now this is be like, he worked for Western Union, in, like, the '60s and '70s, especially, and we'd go to work with him a lot, and then he, worked with this group. I There was one guy that he worked with who was actually, I think, in LA. He was, a breatharian, so it's like the idea is that, there is this prana or life energy in the air, so if you get,
mhm,
better at breathing, you can get more of your needs that you need to stay alive through air and breath than through eating or drinking. So this
yeah,
guy
so
was like,
eventually you don't really need to eat, you just need to breathe the air, yeah.
yeah. So this guy thought that he was working on it and getting better. I mean, this is like, LA back before the EPA. It was like this terrible smog all the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess that does kinda come from, Paramahansa Yogananda wrote about the prana and described them
Yeah.
as lifetrons and stuff like that, and that's yeah, but, he wasn't really promoting it, but he describes it in an autobiography of a yogi. Um,
Yes.
but he had a connection to that area too, I think. Wasn't he was in somewhere in California when he first came to the United States, and kind of that was the introduction of
Y
yoga to the country. So
Yeah. Yeah,
this would have
and
been in the early 20th century, but yeah.
yeah, well, and this is like another instance, like my boyfriend that I was talking about before, his dad grew up in Texas and ended up, becoming involved as a young man with the, Yogananda's community.
Mhm.
So that's how I came to learn about Yogananda is just 'cause, "Oh, it's like my boyfriend's dad." Um, and, yeah, he had some interesting experiences there too, uh, Lloyd, but, yeah, so, yeah, you have all these people, and the thing is that you get, like, a lot of people who are attracted to these ideas and showing up in these places, and then they start working with them and thinking about them and things get a little garbled maybe and stuff. So you get like these kind of weird offshoot ideas that come through even
Mhm.
more. Um, so you
Well,
get
I
like
think the American section of the Theosophical Society eventually moved out that way too, and was there for a while. Yeah.
yeah, this is well, one of the there's a couple of inspirations for what made me want to talk about this. One is Joseph Matheny, the Ong's Hat guy, was talking about on a show. I forget which one it was, but he was talking about when he grew up in Chicago, and then he heard about Robert Anton Wilson or something, and he decided to come to like Berkeley. Ended up in Santa Cruz, and then he started having like meeting all these wild people and having all these wild experiences. And I was thinking, but that's just like that's kind of like that's how it is here.
Yeah.
Everyone does that.
Well, he found
And
his
that's
people,
partly
but
like yeah, but that's partly like the plan because like everyone wants to
right,
have all this like weird shit here so that we get like, primo weirdos like Matheny coming over here,
right, yeah,
keeping it going.
yeah.
But
Well, it's like a vector, like you said. It's a strange attractor that pulls the strange in. So
well, just like the queer community here, right? Because
yeah,
you start to have a certain community that's built of queer people, and then you have, other people who are, in other parts of the country or something, and they're getting kicked out of the house for being gay or something. So
mhm,
they think, okay, if I come over here, I might be able to make a life. So then, the community builds that way. Um,
right. A lot of runaways and stuff like that. Yeah,
yeah. So it
yeah.
definitely has a an opportunity for exploitation, but it can also be very beneficial. Um, the other thing that because about the early 80s, late 70s, there was a lot of like punk was starting to happen,
Hmm.
and I was thinking one thing I wanted to because I don't know, it's getting close to a couple hours, but
Yeah,
I wanted to talk about Rock Against Reagan in 1984 with the Dead Kennedys.
yeah. Were the dead Kennedys from that area, or
I'm pretty sure they're from around here.
okay?
They,
I was
yeah,
never sure, but uh,
yeah,
should have
but they were
looked
very,
into that before. Yeah.
yeah, punk, uh, very political, never
Hmm.
been not political. But the thing was with punk, well, this is another thing. I was listening to someone talk about how they were punk and they'd been to like CBGBs or something, and they were getting interviewed, and they were telling the interviewer, someone about my age, and they're like, "Oh, I'm wearing my old Dead Kennedys T-shirt, and I don't care if it's kind of ratty, I'm still gonna wear it." And I was thinking, Dead Kennedys had T-shirts.
Yeah.
Because
Eventually, they did. Yeah.
when I was seeing them and stuff, it's like, or this sounds so corny, but it was like punk. It was like super DIY.
Hmm.
Like you had to like get like a Hanes T-shirt, then you save the cardboard from the cereal box and put it in between the sides of the T-shirt so it won't bleed through. And then you get the permanent marker and you write, actually, this is what my friend
Yeah.
Joe did, Dead Kennedys on there. And that was
Right.
your Dead Kennedys T-shirt. We used to
Yeah,
do,
or spray paint, like, you could tag up a shirt, or I mean, that's where
yeah,
tie-dye shirts came from too, is people would just
yeah,
use
tie-dyes were from the hippies.
the era before, yeah.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, if you were in the punk scene, I mean, the way I've heard it described to me too is, like, a lot of the underground punk stuff wasn't you weren't seeing, like, a whole list of punk bands. You might have, like, a funk group on the bill, or, like, ska, or, like, some just weird performance art, and then the punk band or something like that, because
You
and there
wouldn't
was no,
have
like, there
you
was no
wouldn't
look to it really either.
no, there was
You
no look.
right,
There was no bill. There was no bill. There was
right.
I drew this. This is like the stupidest thing you're gonna have on your show. You see that kind of little house?
Yeah, a little house with chimney and smoke. Yeah.
This is the logo of a punk band that was okay. So I went to UC Santa Cruz for about 1980 to 82 or 83. Um, there was a group there called the Young Alcoholics. That was their logo, right? Because it's like the
Mhm.
Y and the A. They were in high school. none of them had instruments, but they had this band. I never saw them. And what they would do is they would crash a party where people were getting pretty drunk and had a band.
Hmm.
And when the band got drunk enough, they'd say, "Hey, can we use your instruments?"
Oh wow.
They'd play. So that, I mean, people were really like hardcore about it. People were, they just like CBGBs. That's way too commercial, you know. But it was a fun time. But like people, there's a lot of I think in our notes I found a article about punk communal living, such like they call it crash pads or whatever there, but it was like basically communes, but it was or in squatting,
Hmm.
punk kids in Oakland in the 80s. And you can look at it, and a lot of what people are wearing and how they're looking is not like punk coded at all. Although it would read as punk at the time because it was evolving and it was very DIY. My sister and I used to wear we used to wear fishing lures. We'd buy them at like the local drugstore,
Hmm.
like a fishing lure with the hooks in it as
Yeah. Oh
earrings.
yeah. There you go.
Because it was like it was kind of punk with the hooks, but then also it's a pun. Like a lot of punk was very Dada and surrealist influence, so it's like a pun,
Mhm.
like allure to attract,
Right.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was funny because we'd be wearing around those hooks, they'd kind of blow and catch in your face and stuff, and people are like, "Oh my God, isn't that bothering you to have that?" And we'd be like, "No, what?" And then you
Yeah.
go home and be like,
Style over comfort. Yeah. Oh, I've been there, but
people would be looking at me like, "What? What are you looking at?" But then
but yeah,
also,
it's kind of funny because you see like the cultural representation of it. I feel like it probably was the Sex Pistols that kind of um, were put
codified it.
together. Yeah, were put together intentionally with a look and
Well, yeah, yeah, he
yeah,
did it. Was it Marshall what McLaren?
right. Well, I know there was a guy that well, we don't have to get into the whole history of that because I'm not
Yeah.
all that well versed in my punk history, but I feel like that's kind of where that began was with a specific look is because somebody was trying to push that specifically, you
Yeah.
know. So, but
Well,
then you these things always end up being co-opted by capitalism anyway. So
yes.
as time goes on, you have places like Hot Topic that pop up and they're selling you the band shirts, and then
Yeah.
that becomes kind of the look, you know. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But in the olden days, there was a lot, that was just kinda like I mean, you'd like okay, so this is like the stupidest thing. Some of my most popular punk items were I had, I don't know if people know the V8 drink. It's like a vegetable
Mhm.
cocktail drink,
Oh yeah,
and it
yeah,
has
like
a
tomato
label that
juice.
has, like, all the vegetables on it.
Yeah.
And so and this is like another kind of surrealist, Dadaist thing, right? Because of course, old-timey slang for a, good-looking young woman is a tomato. So
Hmm.
what I did was I would cut it now this is actually a Campbell's tomato soup.
Right.
Actually, this would make a good one too, but what I would, do is you they had the tomatoes on the V8 label, and
Yeah.
you could glue them to, like, a 3 by 5 card and then, cut out around it, and then you could just, like, put, like, a little stud or something through, and you could wear, like, these tomatoes as, like, earrings.
Hmm.
And people would come up to me like, "Is that the V8 label?" And I'd be like, "Well, yes, it is." They were
See,
great groups.
I think you should do that now with a tube of Ben Gay. And
Probably. But the funny thing was I actually wore those earrings when, 'cause, they used to have a lot more, you'd learn about this type of thing through the radio and be like college radio because it wouldn't be like on commercial radio. Um, so KFJC had a, contest, to see the English Beat. They were gonna
Mhm.
play a concert there. And so what I did was you can buy I think you can still buy, like, postcards, prepaid postcards. They're just like plain card
Yeah. Oh,
to
yeah.
the post office. And so I got, like, about 60 of those, and I was working at a photomat, and so I would just collage all these, postcards because you were supposed to do, like, some type of a art entry
Mhm.
to, and they would judge to see who would win the contest, and I guess the guy said, because I made, like, I don't know, I just bought a bunch of these, and had a bunch of old Vogues and stuff, so I'd just sit there in this thing because I didn't have a lot of customers and just, like, make these postcards all the time, and so we won the contest. My sister and I went and we got to see the English Beat, and I got to meet, Rankin Roger wearing
Oh,
my V8 ear
yeah.
anyway, so it was funny because the guy said he's like I'm like, "Well, how did it go with the judging and everything?" He's like, "You were at, like, half the entries for your stuff, of course you were gonna." But any but that was the thing. We didn't have a lot of money either back then, so you had to kinda, um any of the big names that I saw, I think the only big name that I actually paid to see myself was, like, David Bowie
Mm,
during a series music, but, like, when I saw the Clash and stuff, that was, like, Galen Babb took me and my sister, uh, to see the Clash with the English Beat opening. That was really fun and stuff, but, a free concert that we went to was Rock Against Reagan, which was in 1984, and it was the Dead Kennedys in San Francisco.
yeah.
And so, this was during the Democratic National Convention when they were nominating, Walter Mondale, I guess, was running, and there was a big, open, plaza or something there that was pretty big, and, this was kinda at the height of punk, so it was really great to be there because it's like every punk in Northern California was there. It was just, like,
Yeah.
thousands of people, and it was, like, a great show. You had, like, all these guys, like, stage diving off the stage and everything. I've only been able to find, like, a little tiny bit of audio of it, which is not that great. I would love to have video of it because it was just, like, visually, like, the best concert I've been to.
Yeah.
Plus, it was, like, and it was very political and stuff, but the thing, and why do I say it's political? Because it was, like, right next to the,
Well, it's called Rock Against Reagan, so
yeah, and this was at there's his, he was gonna be reelected, so people already knew a bunch of the scummy stuff that he was doing and his policies, which were terrible, um, but it was interesting too because I remember at one point, we're all there having a great time, and you could see a lot of Secret Service guys around, right? They didn't
mm,
stand out from all us punks in their
wow.
suits and the earpieces and shades. But at one point, Jello Biafra was like, "Okay, everyone, take a look around." And there was like the stage, and then the other three sides had like how do I want to say uh, several story buildings on all the sides of the plaza, and along the roof lines on all those buildings were like snipers.
Wow.
And yeah, like a ton of snipers. Sorry about that. Um, and it's from a very cool person though. Uh, And so we looked up and you see like these snipers, with like I don't know, like they have like the rifles on the tripods and they're sighting down. And it's all
Yep.
pointed at us. So of course we're all like flipping them off. But that's the other thing that I really love about the Bay Area is that you've never had this idea that the state isn't going to turn on you, that
Yeah.
you will be subject to state violence, right?
Yeah,
Um,
it's this weird kind of, juxtaposition there where there's a lot of, like, freedom and free expression, but then, yeah, I mean, the amount of times you end up with a gun pointed at you,
yeah.
and not from some dude on the street, like, trying to rob you, it's like, Secret Service or whatever, it's crazy.
Yeah, I was talking, to, Bradley Pleasure about my time living in Oakland, which was kind of at the height of the drug wars, and I was, like, kinda right on that. I was in with my friend Sean, who was an artist. We were, like, right on the edge of, the nice area and the area where it was, uh, rougher.
Mhm.
So we could sit there at night and you could listen, and Sean was, interested in guns. He's like, "Oh, that sounds like a 37 357 Magnum. That sounds like
Yeah.
whatever." I don't know about guns. Um, but yeah, we literally would have, like, helicopters come and, like, look in our window in our apartment
Yeah.
and
It's
stuff, but
wild.
he was telling me that Oakland was one of the first, cities where this type of heavy militarization of the police against the drugs the supposed drug war had been implemented. And this is, of course, a lot due to Ronald Reagan. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, so yeah, but and
Well,
ever since
during his time as governor in California, or because of his presidency?
well, his time as governor in California, and he implemented a lot of this stuff, and then, on a national scale when he became
Yeah.
president. But by the time that, I was living in Oakland and we were at the height of the drug wars, it was getting more towards the mid-80s. There was a guy called Felix the Cat Mitchell, who was a big drug lord in Oakland, and he died in 1985, and it was very scandalous, nationally because, his family just arranged for a funeral cortege. You
Hmm.
have, like, the horse-drawn carriage with the hearse and,
Yeah.
several Rolls Royces and the whole thing, and they got all the permits and everything, um, so that it could have this big thing all through the city, which would have been fine except for, yeah, he died in, San Quentin in prison for being a big old drug lord. So it's like
Yeah.
you have Dan Rather and everything like, "Oh my god, what's happening in the country?"
Right.
So, yeah, yeah.
Well,
There
because everybody was lining up to see it, right?
Oh,
It,
yeah, I always say
yeah.
that everyone came out. You have, like, little kids on their bicycles riding
Right.
after everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, the Oakland police were horrible. So, it's a very complicated situation, and a lot of people had a terrible time with that. But Felix Mitchell, became famous later in, like, I think it's The Wire, that TV
Hmm.
series, because they have this whole storyline where it's like there's the big drug lord who controls everything, and he is murdered, and then everything's up for grabs, and it creates a lot more violence. Because that's
Hmm.
kind of what happened with him. If people want
Oh,
to see his funeral, there's a YouTube video channel called Oaklandish, and it's run by
okay.
Jeff Hull, Hull. He actually did a very interesting interview on the Farm podcast a couple of years ago about the Bay Area and kind of overlapping timeframes, but a lot of these same issues. But he actually has a short video piece with some of the TV coverage of Felix the Cat's funeral, which
Hmm.
is it was I don't know, it's like, what a stupid thing for people to get upset about. It's like, maybe you should be
Yeah.
upset about the fact that, like, a lot of people here do not have consistent water, they do not have consistent sewage, they do not have consistent power
Hmm.
in Oakland at that time.
And
Maybe if
they're in danger of their house burning down, and
yeah,
increasingly nowadays, So,
yeah.
yeah.
So, anyway, but yeah, so yeah, and it's interesting because my mom I was looking at, some pictures of her, uh, when we first moved here in the '60s. That was during the Vietnam War, and she spent a lot of time protesting and in, protests, and she was always, because she was a young mother of 3 children, on the lookout to see, okay, when are they gonna start cracking heads? When are they gonna be getting the tear gas out? When are they gonna start trampling people with horses? Um, yeah, she was at a protest when, and Country Joe McDonald and the Fish were playing when, they found out about the, kids who got murdered at Kent State protesting.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like you never had that idea that you're gonna be able to, live outside of that state-sponsored violence.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, well,
Well, as we kind of wind down here, because um, that bit on that cheery note,
that's why you need art. That's why you need people that can make art out of Meals on Wheels, Campbell's soup.
yeah, yeah, and like I said earlier, I really do mean it because you talk about art, and sometimes people say like, well, if I get stressed out and it's hard to make art, or like I can't afford the supplies, or like I don't have the talent, and I'm just here to say bullshit, because like anything can be art, like any kind of expression can be art. Just you gotta express yourself somehow, and it doesn't even if it's just in the things you do, even if it's just in like like drawing water and carrying water kind of thing, you know, like
You
uh,
gotta get dressed, you gotta eat,
yeah,
right?
right,
Yeah, all that type of
yeah,
stuff. And the other half of it, I think, is learning to appreciate art as opposed to just saying,
as opposed to
just
just consuming it.
yeah, and to, not just focus on, like, the big names,
Yeah,
but, there's gonna be people around you in your daily life who are doing creative, artistic things, and focus on that and learning to spot that and appreciate that.
right, yeah, I mean sometimes you can admire like murals or graffiti, like even graffiti can be really interesting sometimes. I'm like, it's like
Yeah,
looking for like these little things, you know, it's always keep your eyes peeled. And that plays a lot into what I like to call messages from the cosmos too, is finding meaning in these things, finding, you know, seeing what's around you and your so yeah, so I mean that's actually a really good takeaway from this, because I was going to ask you like what you want people to take away from this conversation, um, vis-a-vis looking at figures and people from around that time frame in the greater San Francisco Bay Area, because that, you know, that was kind of the impetus for this, is kind of just describing the vibe, and we know what it's like there, because sometimes people, researchers and presenters on podcasts or, you know, YouTube, whatever they do, will try to present like a particular person, but not within that greater context. So um, I kind of feel like that's what you were driving at with originally
yeah.
with it, but yeah,
Yeah, there's a lot of, crime and political violence that I left out, but I think the main thing is that, yeah, that there's a lot of, it wasn't just like a few people, like the 4
right.
people, like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg as the Beats. It's just like there's a lot of people here, they're all, like, super into it, they're coming up with crazy ideas, uh, you can, get into that whole vibe too, and it can really open up your because I think part of the thing too is that, the relationship between politics and creativity is that if we want a better future, we need to be open to doing something different and looking at
Hmm.
things in new ways. And that's where art can really work those muscles and develop those skills. As
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's important both
awesome.
ways.
Yeah, no, I agree with that entirely. And this is the kind of conversation that needs to be had, get people up to speed and get the hell out there and start making some art and start start protesting, because the world is really fucking falling apart. But
It's a way to connect with people too.
yes, it is. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. To form
which is
these networks and communities, which is important. So,
yeah.
um, all right. Well, if people want to find you online, is that possible now? I know you have your website, but you're locked out of it. You have been for quite a while.
Yeah, I'm on, probably easiest way to find me is, like, on Facebook, Stephanie Quick, or, Blue Sky.
I think you're
um
Luna Rose on there.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, Luna
Yeah,
Rose. Uh,
at Blue Sky or at B Sky,
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, and then, my, blog, Ghost Dog is a Mystery Box, stephaniequick.wordpress.blog, but I have, like, contact information there if you wanna send me, like, an email or something.
Yep. All right.
So,
Beautiful. Well, thanks so much for sharing all this with us, Steph.
thank you for helping me get this off my chest.
Yeah. No trouble at all. Uh, a pleasure as always talking to you. So,
Thank you.
okay. Uh, give Oliver a snorkel for me.
Yes. Lucy and Bernie and everything, thank you.
Yep.